Welcome to your Daily 5 for Wednesday, March 29th, 2023. As I listen to these discussions that keep going on about machine-generated anything, whether it's artwork or writing or answers to questions or whatever, it is interesting to hear people get hung up on the idea, or really focus in, maybe hung up's the wrong term, but focus in on the concept of whether the machines are at a point where they can accurately fool someone into thinking that they are a human being, kind of the Turing test type of thing, or, actual legitimate artificial intelligence, unlike what is going on now, which is large language models and machine generated responses, which are mimicry. And it's funny to hear people talk about it because there's this idea that at some point, whether that's near or far future, of course, differs, but that at some point, these machine models will transition into being actual artificial intelligences, that they will be able to be indiscriminate from a human being, which honestly is impossible. It really is impossible. And I've had this argument with Lando back and forth on whether the brain can be mapped, and I believe that eventually it will be. But even then, it's not going to be a replicant the way people think it is. It's kind of the clone idea, where people think a clone. A lot of people still confuse the idea of a clone in practice for what they think it is in theory, what it's been laid out in speculative fiction, the idea that you clone yourself and it's the same person with all the same memories and same responses. No, it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be the same at all. I mean, not guaranteed anyway. And honestly, AI is not going to somehow be able to fool people into thinking it's a person. Because even if you were to map the brain and every single system in the body, there is still the fundamental difference that a machine will not have a person's body. It will not have a biological body. And honestly, if you were to replicate every biological process all the way up to the, let's say, positronic brain, it still isn't a person because it still isn't a biological entity all the way through. And that makes it something different. Now, if you want to get into an argument on whether somebody replacing their body parts becomes less of a human, that's not quite the same thing, because unless you think you can replicate the soul, and this is really what we're talking about, it's not parts. It is the seat of consciousness, the seat of creativity, of response, of empathy, of sympathy. These are not things that come from replacing a finger. These are things that come from, if you believe in the eternal soul, or that it comes from the brain. And the synapses of the brain in interaction with biological processes and life experience and a whole history of other things that went before the moment that we're in that have led you to be the person that you are. That is not something you're going to be able to replicate in a machine. It just isn't. Even if you somehow were able to create something that could, quote unquote, experience a particular traumatic event or a happy event or whatever, it still is mimicry. It is not actual experience. That is kind of the dividing line. I don't say this to say that humans will always be superior to machine intelligence. No, not at all. It is not a matter of superiority or inferiority. It is a matter of the fact that there is a fundamental difference. And those differences express themselves in lots of different ways, but they are still differences. It is why no two people have the same life experiences. Even twins do not have the exact same experiences. Even ones that marry people with the same name, have the same job, whatever, there are still differences. They may be far more minute than, say, my sister and I, who are vastly different people because we were born a number of years apart and have different life experiences. So yes, we are far different compared to twins who may have grown up very similar and seem almost identical, but in fact are not. That same thing applies to these machine intelligences whenever they develop, whenever that happens. So there again is just, it's not again about inferiority or superiority and good or bad or better or worse. It's not any of that. It is this idea that people are so afraid that there will be some kind of exact duplication happening. And I just don't believe that's ever going to happen. Because if you were to replace every single part on a machine with a biological component, including the brain, assuming that could ever be done, then it's a person. It doesn't matter what it started as. You've now created a person at a certain point. But again, it is a person. So even that has shifted. So will there ever be a point where any machine intelligence is the equal, quote unquote, of a person? No. And I think that's great. We are, in fact, for some reason, better or worse, we are a unique thing. We are in a unique creation. And so we should be happy about that. Instead of worrying about when it reaches that point, we should be happy about the fact that, guess what? It's never going to reach that point, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing. Later.